this place or we'll be late.
Make a left on Astrology Avenue. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant right. It should be right here. 444 way. Oh, turn.
It looks like Renee. Yay, we're on time. The James and Kellee Show.
Great, let's start the show.
What? James, you look so different. James, what happened?
I wanted to, not shock you. So
You shocked me. You shocked me too. Okay, wait a minute. How many dead people do I have behind me? If you're the real James, you'll know.
I don't know. Okay, I'm taking this off because I'm not the real James.
Oh my gosh, everybody. I'm so happy to see you, Shirley. Oh my gosh. Everybody, we've had some big changes just for today, we have some changes. And normally, as you know, James Van Prague is always by my side here. But my original sidekick was Dr. Shirley Impellizzeri. And this is Dr. Shirley Impellizzeri. Hey, Cheryl. Oh
I'm
my
so
gosh.
sad that James can't be with us.
Well, I'll tell you what, this is what happened. James is exhausted. So he is taking today off and he did not do a soul care today. So he really just was so happy that you were on tonight. And it was so funny because it was James's idea to do soul trauma. And we're definitely going to have a great discussion about trauma.
Yeah.
But James told me to tell everybody he loves everybody and he'll be back next week. And we'll have another show next week. But in the meantime, before I even introduce Dr. Shirley, what James and I always do now is we always do an astrology report.
I love it. I have my notepad.
Got your notepad?
I'm taking notes.
By the way, I love your office.
Thank you. Looks like yours.
I love it.
I copied you. That's
oh my gosh. Well, let's talk about February, everybody, because oh my gosh, somebody's from Gibraltar. Oh my gosh. Wow, people are from all over. It's so wonderful to see everybody. OGs in the house. I love that. OGs. I think we're OGs. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about February before we talk about trauma. Or they might go hand in hand.
I think they're going to go hand in hand. Yeah.
Oh
I have
my
a
God.
distinct feeling.
Oh my God. February is a really intense month, everybody. So put your seatbelts on because I know I say this a lot, but this really is one of those.
Kellee, you've been saying that for a long time now.
And have I changed? Have I changed anything?
Can you tell the planets and shit to please change? We need a little bit of
levity?
Of a break.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got one coming up in a couple of years. So let's start off with February because February is, if you look at February and the year 2022, February is a 2 year. So let's talk about February from a 2 perspective because this month is really interesting. There's February 2nd, which is a 2/2/22. There's February 20th, which is a 2/2/22. And then there's February 22nd, 2/2/22.
Oh my God, too many twos.
Too many twos, right? Yeah. In fact, the funny thing about this is the next time there'll ever be any twos in a row like that is actually in the year 2202.
Wow.
I mean, we might be here, but it would be a whole new ball game at that point. But 2 is important here because, oops, oh, I'm so sorry. Hold on a second. Just like the old days. Just like the old days. My hair got in the way. I'm so sorry. Hold on a second. Oh my gosh. Okay. Just like the old days, and just like that. Sorry about that. Renee.
Okay.
So sorry.
It's probably due to the pardon my French clusterfuck of February.
Oh my God! I'll tell you what.
I'm just saying it might be due to that.
It might be. I'll tell you what. So it's been one of those energy days you would not believe. Okay, so the number 2 represents duality, and so duality, especially this month, will be really important. Duality is the difference, opposites, like good versus evil, black versus white, cold versus hot, those kind of things, ups and downs. So twos, there'll be a lot of duality. There'll be a lot of things you questioning your own beliefs this month about how you feel about something. You may have felt one way, and now you're going to really get pushed into this month of how you may really be feeling about something else. And all of this month of February, and really for the year, but this month has a lot to do with growing your soul. Your soul
Mm.
is going to be expanding and expanding because you're going to be testing duality, frankly. So that's going to be a really interesting time. The other thing about this powerful month is it's an 8 month actually, because 2022 is a 6, and then you add 2 to that, February, and it's an 8. So that brings a lot of power. Well, let's talk about the power this month, because this is interesting, isn't it? We have the Super Bowl, big time power, and we also have the Olympics, a lot of
Mm.
power, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So this is going to be very interesting. Twos also learn that's about relationships. It's about cooperation. We're going to see a lot of people coupling up this year. It's a people are going to want to be together with other people.
Hmm.
And we're also going to see a lot of babies being born. By the end of the year, we'll have a lot more babies, a lot of babies, special babies. So yeah, so this is one thing. Okay, it's one aspect of February, all these twos.
You gave us all
Another,
the good stuff first, didn't you?
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm doing my best, Cheryl.
I know you will, Kel.
I'm trying.
And I'm
Uh,
sure we all, including myself, appreciate that.
there you go. So, next, tomorrow is Chinese New Year.
Mm.
And it's a really important year because it's the year of the tiger. Now, it's not just any tiger, it's the year of the water tiger, because each year has a different element like fire or earth
Oh,
or
okay.
air or metal. So the year previously of 2021 up until this moment right now has been the year of the ox, the metal ox. And the
Mm.
metal ox was one about plodding around, plodding along. So an ox plods, trying to get through things.
Hmm.
Very different. What we tried to get through in 2021 through COVID, what we've tried to get through is different going forward as of tomorrow, because tomorrow the water tiger is passionate, it's emotional because water brings emotion. It's it tigers love their freedom, and they also break a lot of rules. And so it's going to ask all of us to be brave going forward in this year of the water tiger. So you are a tiger,
Mm.
interesting enough, Cheryl, if you were born in 1938, 1950, 1962. And if you were born in 1962, you were a water tiger. This is quite a
Mm.
year for you. 1974, 1986, 19, no, I'm sorry, 1986, 1998, 2010, and then going forward in 2022. So this is a very significant thing. Interesting enough, the Super Bowl is going to be in 2 weeks. And you know who's playing in it, who won yesterday? Were the Cincinnati Bengals,
Mm.
Tiger.
Yes,
And they're playing, Cheryl, our hometown, Los Angeles,
I know.
the LA Rams. So yesterday as I was watching the game, and I'm not a football person, and you're not a football person, right, Cheryl? I mean, we're both not for football people.
No.
James is not a football person. But what's important about this is as I was watching the game yesterday, I said, oh my God, it's the year of the Tiger. Tiger's going to win. Now, going into Los Angeles, I still think Tigers might win because, it's a year of the Tiger.
Because it's
So
the
how
year of the tiger.
oh my gosh. Another thing of great significance that's coming up is by February 4th. So Mercury is still in retrograde. Venus just went direct, and Mercury is still in retrograde. But as of February 4th, all the planets are going to be direct for like 2 months. And that's going to give us a boatload of energy to get through a lot of complicated issues that come up in the next couple of months. And the last thing I want to talk about, because there's so much, I'm going to actually do a full report on my Thursday show, Ask Me Anything. That's at 5 o'clock Pacific time every Thursday. And I'm going to go over through all of everything has to do with February. But
Mm,
one of the things that's really important is tonight, like where you live, Shirley, in the West Coast, tonight is the new moon. If
mm.
you're on the East Coast, it's actually 1 in the morning, so it's actually considered February 1st. But tonight, in some locations, it's the new moon. And if it's tonight in in January, on January 31st, it's considered a black moon. And it's a really rare moon. It means two new moons in 1 month. So it's a really rare aspect, and it's in Aquarius. So there's a great quote that I want to read about this new moon because I think this is a fascinating quote. Shirley, you're going to love this. It's choose your intention carefully and then practice holding your consciousness to it so it becomes the guiding light in your life.
Wow.
Is that great? John
Yeah.
Roger Hinkins. He was the founder of the movement of spiritual inner awareness. So, with this new moon in Aquarius, you want to set your intentions. And because it's in Aquarius, you want to work towards humanity. You want to put something about humanity in your life as you go forward. So, it's a really powerful time. This is going to be a very powerful month. And again, I'll go over all the other aspects on Thursday. A lot of things to talk about astrologically. It was quite a month.
Yeah.
Put your seatbelt on. So, everybody, thanks for listening to that. Now, I want to talk about my dearest friend, Dr. Shirley Impellizzeri. Oh my gosh. So, Shirley and I did a show called Both Sides Now TV for 6 years. I think we had 300 shows. I think we did.
Wow.
And then Shirley's life went in a different direction. And then
Mhm.
James wanted to do the show with me, and his show was called Beyond. So that's how we put this together. It's Both Sides Now and Beyond. So I've known
I love.
Shirley. Isn't that a great title?
Yeah.
I've known Shirley for over 25 years, and got her PhD from UCLA, and I'm proud to call her, she's proud to say that she's a colleague with Dr. Peter Levine, who
Mm.
is the leading expert in somatic experience therapy. And so
Yeah.
Shirley has been able to literally be at the feet of the foot of, what do they call the feet of the master?
Yeah.
Studying and learning and
Mm.
working with Dr. Peter Levine. And Shirley wrote a book a few years ago called, I love it, Shirley. Don't say anything. Why can't I change? Okay.
The name haunts me.
It's a great name because it really does talk about self-destructive patterns in your
Mm.
life. It's a great book. It's a fabulous book. So Shirley specializes in trauma, and that's why we're going to talk about trauma today. But as a medium, I have to say I've worked with Shirley for many years, and she supports mediums. So for all of you mediums out there, know there are great psychologists that work with mediums, right, Shirley?
Absolutely. I mean, the healing that I saw just working with you, that you are able to give people that have someone who's passed on is just, it's just inexplicable. And I, as you've always taught me, and as, I agree too, it's not about convincing people, but it's a shame if people don't
Yeah.
believe that there is something else out there and that we can still connect with loved
It
ones.
helps with healing, doesn't it?
Oh, it helps tremendously with healing, which is why when you and I started working together, I thought, and you'll have to pardon my my expressive language, but I thought, fuck it, if my colleagues, don't
Well,
see me differently.
you were very brave about that because a lot of therapists would not have taken, well, me on.
Well, the thing, first of all, they'd be they'd be it's such a loss, of all the things that I've learned
Wait,
from you.
but I should say this, everybody. Shirley, my mother was a psychologist, as some of you know, and Dr. Shirley was my mom's psych assistant
Yeah, I was
for
her
years,
intern. Of course, I'm going to pass it forward.
and then
Yeah,
I was Shirley's intern.
yeah. So, but I just thought the healing. I mean, that's why we walk. That's why I got into this profession. So how can I not, bring up and talk about and expose something that is so healing, like
Right,
mediumship is. It's
right.
a shame that some people don't have the gift and say they do, and that gives, I think, people a bad name. But it would be remiss of me to not, to not celebrate and put it
Yeah.
out there and be right here with you because it is so healing.
Yeah, my gosh. Well, and today we're going to talk about trauma and particularly the vortex of trauma. Can you explain what that is to everybody?
Yeah. Well, you know, as much as, of course, I believe in our spiritual selves, what James, first thing James taught me was, what does he say always? That we're souls having a human experience.
Yep. Hmm.
So we are still having a human experience. And on Earth, we can, experience traumas. And we used to think traumas were like big deal traumas, which in my field we call the big T traumas, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, rape, the things that everybody would never disagree. That's traumatic. But there are also small T traumas, which are little things that happen just over and over and over again,
Like,
which
give me
can
an
also
example of
be,
that, like a small
well,
T trauma.
it's like, for example, as babe, every mammal attaches
Okay.
to the person that they're mostly around. So by 18 months, who the baby is primarily attached to, because it's the person that they look for. It's the person that they get calmed by immediately, like a dog. A dog can wag its tail and be, love to be petted by a whole bunch of different people. But once their owner shows up, it goes crazy. I mean, you have two dogs. So it's because your dogs are attached to you primarily. Everybody else is great and fine, but the primary attachment,
Yeah.
and depending on how attuned that person, and there's secondary attachments that are just as important in a person's life as well, but how attuned that person was to our needs, you know, sets the stage. And those can be like the little traumas. The baby's crying and the mother or the caretaker, it's not always the mom, doesn't go to it right away. That's a misattunement, you know. So many of these throughout the years can also cause trauma and can cause us to all of a sudden have anxiety as adults, or not trust people, or kind of
By
just
by
be
by the mother or the primary attachment
by the
person
primary attachment. And this
that
is
didn't
not
attune.
that wasn't attuned to what a child needs. Many
Interesting.
times a doctor will, misadvise. They still believe that sleep training a baby is a good idea. In other words, you leave the baby to cry it out at night so they can learn how to self-soothe. Well, the myelination in the brain doesn't exist for a baby to learn how to self-soothe. Babies learn how to soothe themselves by the way we soothe them.
Mm,
That's how they learn.
yeah.
So there's still, unfortunately, a lot of misinformation. And so it's not, and I'll repeat this through the whole thing. It's not about blame. It's about understanding, because as an adult now I can understand what happened, why I think a certain way, why some things are, where my trauma and percentage of trauma is. There's no point in blaming. They did the
Right.
best they could, but it's so I can understand it. And so then, and at this point, the ship's already sailed. What didn't happen for me or to me when I was a kid, I can't get from somebody else. I can only get from myself. And that's where, when you go and see a therapist, you heal those wounds. So you do have more of a strong sense of self. So
Right.
then you can confront the world. Yeah.
Absolutely. What is a trauma vortex? Can you
The trauma
explain that?
vortex, yeah, it's just kind of a term that we use to say when we're in, like when we get triggered,
Hmm.
we go immediately into that trauma vortex. So
Is that
whatever
like a
hasn't been
black
healed,
hole?
it kind of feels like a black hole. What happens from a psychological standpoint, it causes people literally to regress back into childhood. And so we're actually responding as if we're there. We don't feel like we're a kid, so it's not, a conscious regression. But when we get triggered, we will react, and you see people many times, you see people reacting kind of in childlike behaviors,
Hmm.
even road rage, you
Oh,
know.
absolutely. Well, Wendy Connolly makes a comment, and it's a good comment. She says, "We're all traumatized by this pandemic." And
Yeah,
interesting enough, Wendy, that's what one of the reasons Shirley's here is because
yeah.
we're going to be doing an event on February 12th with James Van Prague and a wonderful woman who's a sound healer named Geraldine Glass. And we're going to be talking about the effects of being traumatized, actually,
With COVID.
by
Yeah,
COVID.
yeah,
Whether you've been isolated, whether you've had loss of it, whether you've had it, whether whatever it is. And this is not a political statement at all. It's just observing what we've gone through in the last couple of years. And we've kept the price point really low so people can join us. And it's
yeah,
really about healing. And Shirley's going to give tools on healing this the trauma, the depression, the anxiety. And I'm going to be
yeah,
talking, James and I are going to be talking about it from a spiritual standpoint of what the opportunities are for growth during that we've had.
Yeah.
And Geraldine is going to be doing this unbelievable 30-minute sound bath. So please join us
Those are
if you
so
can. It's the
healing.
day before the Super Bowl, but if you can join us, that would just be great. And then James is going to do an incredible meditation. So
Yeah.
it's going to
Yeah.
be really quite a big
It,
event.
I mean, we're all going through COVID fatigue.
COVID fatigue, right? Oh my God, Shirley, is that the
You know,
truth? Is that
and
the truth?
yeah. So it's trauma on top of whatever trauma is unresolved in us. If we look at trauma is basically when the nervous system gets over. I mean, the brain's biggest job is to survive, is to stay alive. That's how the
Oh,
species, you know, stayed alive through all these years.
mhm.
So that's the most important part, job of the brain. And so if we start from there and we look at anything that feels threatening, that feels unsafe, and a child needs to feel safe. You
Yeah,
know, they, they,
yeah.
they say don't spoil the child. There's no such thing the first year. A child needs to feel held and touched. And, you know, a baby, the baby only knows it exists by the mother looking in his eyes and mirroring his existence to him,
Mm.
to her. The mother smiles and the baby smiles back because the message to the baby is it's a good thing that you exist.
Oh my
So kids
gosh.
that came from neglect didn't get that.
Right. Jennifer Pedke asked, do people get stunted in maturity from that age of when trauma occurs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Particularly if it's a big shock trauma or like the age where people started to use drugs,
Yeah,
say it's 15 or 16. And then as an adult, you kind of see that their emotional development got stunted right there. So yeah.
right. Right. Oh my gosh. Well, tell us about like what with the work with Dr. Levine, what do they talk about with trauma, with trying to uh, heal trauma, trying to
Yeah.
get out of the stop the vortex?
Well, let me just say I am like
Yeah,
a starstruck little girl when I'm
she
around
really
Peter.
is. I am not kidding you. You just say the name Peter Levine and
Oh my
it's
God. I'm
all
like,
done.
oh,
No, it's true.
because he came up, I mean, he just studied this for years and he came up with somatic experiencing. Now, he's not the first one to come up with a type of therapy that uses the body to release trauma. But what he wondered about years ago was why animals in the wild didn't get traumatized. So you see an antelope that almost gets caught and somehow gets away. And then when you watch it back with the herd, it's hanging out fine. And he's like, we share that same part of the brain. Why do we get traumatized and animals don't? So he started to observe them. And right after an almost attack, if they go safe, once they're safe, he noticed that the muscles kind of, or they kind of shake, and that's getting rid of that fight or flight energy. That anytime we're in danger or we perceive danger, the primitive part of the brain immediately goes into fight or flight. And if we can't fight back or run away, we'll go into freeze. So everything is turned on inside, but we look like we're the calmest person on earth.
Okay, so this is really interesting because Bella makes a good point here. She says that's the book is called Waking the Tiger by Peter
Mhm.
Levine. So again, here's that reference to tiger.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a month where and a year where become we all wake up on some level
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah.
Oh
Absolutely.
my.
Yeah. I forgot about that reference. He's always called, that tiger is that life force in us, you
Now,
know.
yeah, this is an interesting question. Ruth Suarez says, "Hello, Kelly and Shirley. Can trauma also be things you did not get, like being the love that your soul needed? I often hear they loved you their way." Good point.
Well, that's the attunement piece.
Okay.
As a parent, if you want to be the best parent, and, my book shows, how I learned along the way. And when I started to learn about the brain and the body and everything, all the mistakes I did. So please try not to feel terrible and know that you just did the best that you could. Um, but yeah, that's the attunement piece. So it's important to get to know your kids, get to know your babies. You might have, the temperament is something we are born with. So those kids that are slow to warm up and need to take time and look,
Hmm.
observe, and those kids that just jump right in. That's
Right.
temperament. So it's
Right.
important for a parent to attune to that and to know what child needs and to try and help guide them that way. But when I come from neglect, and so there was nothing. There was no attunement. There was no interaction. So you grow up with a sense of, I don't deserve to exist, because that existence piece
Did
is
you
what
and
gets.
did you feel that you were not part of the herd? Because I know there's something about that being part of so you're not alone. That you don't belong in the
Well,
world.
that's an evolutionary piece because
Okay.
the nervous system is programmed to connect with people because the more
Mhm.
connected we are, the more, the more high chance of survival. Because if I'm alone in the
Right.
woods, I can't see the tiger approaching me behind, but you can. So our nervous system was kind of built to be in connection with people. Kids that come from neglect don't feel like they belong or don't feel like people want them there. I remember I used to get invited to parties and then not go because I assumed, they don't really want me there.
And then did that play out in your life, your entire life till such a time that you worked on it?
Um, yeah, I know you're very kindly asking me that question as if you don't know.
No, I know the answer. I'm just
I
I want
know,
other people to
I know.
understand it.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Well,
I know the answer.
because and Peter once told me neglect sometimes can have worse effect on the psyche because of that need to connect. There was no one there. So with physical sexual abuse, that kind of thing, although it's horrific, it's someone doing something to you. So you must exist if someone is doing something to you. With neglect, you don't really know that you exist. So you're kind of floating in a way.
Mm,
And you taught
right.
me about, coming into the body. So which is why, not surprisingly, I found somatic experiencing because I wasn't connected with my body. And so things, I believe the universe kind of presents things. It
Right.
throws things your way, free choices, whether you listen
Right.
to or not. But when I started that training, it changed my life
Wow. Wow.
and how I practice. I mean, it's because what happens is, just to finish the thought, is that fight or flight, when something happens and we can't complete that, it gets
Mhm.
stuck. That energy of the fight or flight or freeze response doesn't just disappear because the event is over.
Right.
And so many times anxiety is a fear because you didn't get a chance to do something about it. And so in session, when we talk about, sometimes we'll be talking, somebody will be telling me about a trauma and I'll notice their arm go up very subtly. I'm exaggerating. And that could be this arm wanting to protect and it didn't get a chance to. So in somatic work, I'll notice and I'll invite the person's attention to the arm and say, does your arm feel like doing something? Is there an impulse, an urge?
Mm.
Sometimes they'll do this. And so we do the movement very slowly. And then at times they'll notice tingling all the way down their arm. That's the nervous system releasing that fight response that got stuck. And that's truly how you heal trauma. We can understand what happened to us, but until we work with the body to help release the trauma, it in my opinion, doesn't get fully healed.
Wow. So listen to this. April Fox Billmeyer says, "I had a bipolar mom, and I'm 63. So I'm assuming your mother was not medicated, trying to get over the mental abuse she shared with me."
Yeah. Yeah. It's sometimes it's just someone sharing that pain and someone holding the space for them to have those
Yeah.
feelings. Many times, especially as kids, you can't feel. You have to shut it down. So the work can be helping the person first notice what they're feeling, acknowledge, put words to what they're feeling, and then many times just sit there with them while they're having those feelings that were shut down so long ago.
Mm. But Debbie Race Rayfaro says, "What about a person that screams in their sleep and then wakes up?"
I have to assume that there's certainly something that's
Yeah.
associated with either nighttime or with night terrors, that kind of thing. As you know, Kelly, we always rule out everything medical.
Hmm.
So I would maybe go to a sleep study or something like that to rule out anything physical that might be happening.
Yeah.
But certainly after that, then it could be that something happened at night.
Well, I
And
tell you, I don't know. Shirley, my mother had this horrific situation where she would scream every night. I mean, and it was awful. We'd come running. I mean, from the time I was little until till she died. It was constant. And I mean, the only thing we could figure out was that she had been either left alone or something had been scared out of her mind. It was the weirdest thing. Went on forever.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, I remember that.
Beth Balestria, is it possible to have a traumatic event many years before a childhood event, which you didn't react to and later on manifest itself later in the mid 60s?
Yeah, yeah, you can because the body remembers. The body remembers everything, even if the mind isn't fully aware, and somehow it will recreate things.
What is
You
that
know,
book? The Body Keeps the Score?
The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He's one of the leading researchers in trauma. And that book really describes what happens, in the body and why it's so important to work with the body to release trauma, not just the mind.
Right. Marcia Marquise says, if you were spanked often as a child, as well as psychological abuse, it's really hard to get out of freeze mode. I have to work on it daily. Can you talk about that, Shirley?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because when you're spanked, I mean, that is a threat.
Hmm.
That's a threat to the nervous system. So, and you can't respond because as a kid, you know that you might get more in trouble, and so you shut it down and you go into freeze. You keep in mind that the brain automatically, without us thinking, goes into fight or flight, because when something's coming at you, you have to fight back or take off running to save your life. So the brain will do that immediately, automatically. And if you can't fight back, that energy gets stuck. If you can't fight back, you go into a freeze. And that freeze energy is still there unless you
Hmm.
work through it. Yeah. And
Wow.
under the freeze might be fight or flight. So sometimes when you help someone out of the freeze response, there's this energy because the fight, or flight is under there. So then you work with that.
Wow. Um, so Isabella says, so it stunts you from picking the right people in your life, trauma she's talking about, also known as a spouse.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Because the brain likes what's familiar. And so you will recreate your childhood environment because that's what you're used to, even if it's not the best for you.
And you're not
And
even necessarily conscious that you're
oh, you're
doing that.
not at all, because who would
Yeah,
choose the same thing? I
right.
mean, I used to run support groups for child molesters and their spouses. Every single one in there had been molested as a kid.
Oh,
That's not a coincidence,
right.
you know? Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
God.
So,
Um, Marcia Marquez, hence why COVID has really wreaked havoc on many. The stuck alone part. Well, I
yeah.
think because people have been alone and not being able to go about what they normally would have gone about. There's all kinds of, fear that comes up with that.
Well, there's the fear. And then I think, in all my Peter Bessel, everyone, is saying that we should have never come up with the term social distancing. We should have come up with the term physical distancing because we need to socialize.
Yeah.
So staying in contact with people can be done virtually.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not the best. The best is always physical, but staying in connection with people is so important. So
Right,
physically distancing is one thing, not socially distancing. We still
right.
need to socially connect.
Tempo Blackstar says, I thought I resolved my parental issues years ago, but my mom passed in August of 2021, and
Mm.
I keep finding out that it angers me all over again. I must have suppressed anger for years.
Well, we can work through some stuff and then other things get triggered. I mean, life already happened. And so I think that we can find ourselves getting triggered forever. Maybe not as often, maybe not as intensely, you know, um, and in a work with parents, it's so difficult because we have this idea that if I love my parent, in this case my mom, or I understand that she did the best she could, I can't also be angry at her. And I'm forever saying different emotions for the same person or the same event can coexist. We can be angry at some of the things a parent did and also love them and also understand that they did the best they could. The best to do is just to notice the anger and to sit with it, to name it. That neuroscientists have a term, name it to tame it. If we're able to name what we're feeling, sometimes that's enough and we'll notice that it dissipates a little. When I was started this work, what would come up is this image of a volcano that was just erupting in my stomach. And I would just sit with that and you really feel it until it starts to dissipate. Emotions always dissipate, always, even if they feel like a tsunami. If you wait long enough, they will start to dissipate and calm. The thing is that we get scared because sitting with an emotion isn't fun. So we get scared and we shut it down instead of just knowing that it'll come down on its own. Yeah.
One of the techniques too I do want to talk about for if you've lost a parent and there's still anger there, it's called the empty chair. It's a Gestalt technique where, and as a spiritualist, I know that if you have a chair there and you need to talk to your mother who's passed or your father who's passed or whoever has abused you, you literally put them in that chair.
Mhm.
They're long on the other side, but they're right there as you are telling them exactly. They're listening. So I want you, that's a great technique to use. Do you ever
Yeah.
use that,
Yeah.
Shirley?
Oh yeah.
The empty
Yeah.
chair?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay also to imagine what you'd want to say to them and what you'd want to do with them, because again, that's just a metaphor for the fight.
Yeah.
And if we don't get it out, if we don't help complete that, then it still stays stuck. Some people get horrified at some of the thoughts they have. I want to pull their eyes out or something. And again, I always say it's not that you're actually going to do that.
Right.
It's just a metaphor. How like detailed and gruesome it is just a metaphor for how much anger there's inside, how much rage there's inside, and you'll notice that will help move it. Yeah.
Susie Everett says, I grew up in a family of violence, drugs, alcohol, and abuse. I always felt like I was in the wrong family and didn't fit in with my family. Lots of abandonment has left me not knowing how to connect with other people. Lots of fear within groups.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's working through that fear of the chaos of not knowing what to expect. You know, um,
So would that be the trauma vortex here?
that would be, yeah, because trauma is about unpredictability, which is why COVID,
Mhm.
just living in that unpredictability is so traumatic in and of itself. Um, it's not being able to predict, because the brain also is an anticipatory organ. It predicts the future based on the past in order to be prepared for it. So
Mm.
that might be a little bit about what's going on with Susie, is that your brain is predicting chaos or unsafety within groups because that's what you experienced. And
And
so
if
then
you're,
it would be very uncomfortable to be in
yeah.
groups.
Well, and if you were doing that, then you're really not in the present moment. You're living in some
That's
futurized event, and anxiety would be really high.
that's exactly it. So part of the work to help is that mindful meditation work, which is mindfulness. I mean,
Mhm.
let's put the meditation piece aside. Mindfulness is just being in the moment, even if the moment is uncomfortable.
Mm.
And I think I was telling you, Kel, I had a mindful teacher, and he was just so sweet and so matter of fact. And I was in this group and studying mindfulness, and he puts us in a meditation, and he goes, and just notice what you're noticing. And I noticed myself getting anxious as fuck. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm in a meditation. I should be calm. And so then he says, and ask yourself, can I be okay with what I'm noticing in this moment? And I'm thinking in my head, no, I can't, because I'm anxious as fuck. I mean, I'm not supposed to be anxious. I'm supposed to be meditating. And then he says, and if you're not okay, ask yourself, can I be okay with not being okay with what's happening in this moment? And that was
Ah.
it. That was it. Even if you don't like what's happening in this moment, can you be okay with not being okay?
Mm.
Because the key is to be in the moment, just like you said.
Right, right.
And when we're viewing, like Susie, walking into a group as dangerous, we don't know if that group is dangerous or not. It may not be,
Right.
but your brain is anticipating what you experienced. So it's important to be in the moment, notice everyone in the group. Is this dangerous or not? And really assess it from the moment.
Right. Hi, Peter Redgrove. Hi, Peter. He says it requires extraordinary strength, which it really does, to do this kind of work, as well as a clear vision of what your life can be. It's very true. Essentially, letting go of any and everything negative, which really is working through a lot of things, but you can do it. You just have to get real clear on it and do it.
Yeah, it's not an easy
No,
thing
it's
to
not.
be in when you're working through it, but boy, afterwards it's unbelievably liberating.
Right. That's so true. Elizabeth Glomsky, so good to see you, Dr. Shirley. I also never
Hi.
felt connected growing up and still get that today. How do you know if the trauma is fully healed? Great question. Or is it a continuous learning process?
Well, Elizabeth, I'm glad you're asking that
Glad you
question, because
asked.
I asked Peter the same thing. I said, do you ever fully heal your trauma? And he looked away and was so thoughtful in his response, and then looked at me and said, he goes, we may not be able to fully heal it, but we can get it to the point where we can live, where it doesn't stop
Mm.
us from reaching our goals, from getting into a relationship if that's what we want, from living.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sarah Turner says, how do you locate someone who uses these practices? Actually, we have the answer. It's healingtrauma.org. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a somatic experiencing website because there are practitioners all over the world. So in there, you can put in your zip code and you can see if there's a practitioner in your area.
I believe it's healingtrauma.org, right? Or is
The
it trauma healing?
traumahealing.org, did they change that?
Renee, can you check on that? I can't remember if it's traumahealing.org. I think it's traumahealing.org. Yeah.
We'll check and see. I usually just put in somatic experiencing in the, and then, of course, everyone that's trained doesn't always make them good. So I would call people and get, and interview them over the phone and see what feeling you get.
Right. So Bella asks, how do you get out of that cycle of it? I think she means chronic PTSD. And again, that would be this trauma vortex. So what's the first step, Shirley, of getting out of this? As soon as you come to this planet, you're going to have traumas. I mean, there are going to be traumas, but some really hold us back. So what is the best way to begin this process?
Well, certainly, I mean, the best way is always working
complex
with
PTSD.
Yeah, working with an astute therapist that knows how to work with that. But, part of it is the balance, especially when we come from a childhood that was very chaotic or traumatic. We hyper focus on the negative stuff, and we know the negative stuff, and the brain has a negativity bias, which is a evolutionary survival piece, because I had to remember the negative stuff, like where my buddy got killed, because that way I can avoid that so I don't get killed. The good stuff, who cares? And so it's such an important piece to balance the brain out. So what I would say, the first step is start to notice things that make you feel good, that bring a smile to your face, that calm you down. And notice how the body feels, even if it's little things, and even if it lasts just for a second, like your favorite song comes on, or whatever it may be. I have flowers, like I see the flowers behind you, Cal. I love flowers. Or when I get home, I turn on candles because I love that. And so you notice it, and then notice if your body kind of relax. And notice that every time you notice that, anything different from trauma or PTSD, you're stimulating other parts of your brain. And we can rewire the brain. This idea that you can't teach an old dog a new trick is not true. From a brain perspective, we can rewire, the brain.
Well, that gives a lot of hope to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the first piece that I would is start to notice things that are opposite of fear, trauma, and chaos. Again, even if they only last for a moment, in that moment when you notice it and you take it to the body, you start to stimulate other parts of your brain.
Sounds so simple.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a start. It doesn't mean you're not going to get triggered, and it doesn't mean you're not going to,
Trey says, I lost both my parents in separate car accidents growing up. My mother at 6 years old and my father at 14 years old. I'm also an empath. I'm now 42 years old, but I still struggle with losing them. Any advice? Fix this, Cheryl.
Well, I think that's one for you, but that, that our parents, even if they weren't the best, it's almost like our tether, So losing parents, especially so young, I can only imagine how lost you must have felt. I would find maybe, older people that you can look up to, people that you can connect with, that really see you, because that's difficult. It would bring up so much, like, I'm alone in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, it would bring up so much of that. Well, Shirley, you and I have worked with many clients. I mean, I'll never forget, we had a client that lost the whole family in a plane accident.
Yeah.
And I mean, it really does, it requires a good, solid therapist, I think.
Absolutely. And finding connection with people. You may be a kind of person either that overconnects or underconnects. So see which side you fall on and try to bring it a little bit more to the middle.
Right.
But connecting with people when you feel isolated is an important piece.
Shirley, here's a really interesting one. This is from Deborah Elizabeth Stone. She said, I was involved in a terrible attack that almost killed me. I was in a coma for 5 weeks. I have retrograde amnesia. Is there a way for me to free myself from this trauma that I can't remember?
Yeah, absolutely. I would highly recommend a somatic therapist. Someone who, now, some people are body workers, some people are trained and licensed therapists that have a specialty in working with, somatic is just a fancy name, word for body, working with the body. That's how you'll be able to start to work through that. And being
Because
in a
the body
coma,
doesn't forget anything.
exactly. And even when we're in a coma, the body
Mhm.
remembers. So even if you're being poked and prodded, Peter always says, when you go for surgery, ask for 3 different types of anesthesia. Ask for a Valium, which you know which kind of calms the nervous system. The regular, of course, all anesthesia, but also to anesthetize locally the part, the area of the body that's going to get cut,
Wow.
because otherwise the body still feels like it's an attack. And when you're in a coma, you've got tubes and people are prodding and poking, and that's part of the trauma too, that you won't readily remember,
Mhm.
but that is still there. So I would
Wow.
work with a very skilled, you can
Yeah.
work through
Mhm.
the residual trauma of that, but it's important to work with a therapist that's trained.
Shirley, this is a great question from Jacqueline Rink. How do you release trauma? So, can you describe it from a body's perspective? What some of those things, one of those actions are for a body when it
Yeah.
releases trauma?
Well, when it's again, it's completing that fight or flight or freeze. So, as I said before, so as an example, I was working with this gentleman who had witnessed, anytime you're either in or you witness a life-threatening, um, accident or something, that can cause PTSD in yourself. So he had witnessed an accident that was just horrific, where people didn't make it, and he started to feel like he couldn't drive.
Mm.
And so in my work, you ask them to talk, you take kind of frame by frame, scene by scene, and you notice if there's any activation in the body. And he was telling me the story, and parts of it were horrific. And I would stop him and I would pause and I go, "What are you noticing in your body as you're saying that?" He's like, "Nothing." And so he kept going. So of course, that's what told me, is that the emotions of what happened got fragmented and lodged in an unconscious, in a place where he couldn't readily
Mhm.
get. But the
Yeah.
story he remembered. Sometimes we won't remember the story, but we'll remember a feeling. So it depends on how. Um, and so he's telling me, and then I learned that you move your head from side to side. Just sometimes that might bring it up. So I asked. So once he was done and he was feeling nothing, I asked, move your head to the right slowly, and he did that. Nothing. So then we did, move your head to the left, and he did this because the accident happened there. So when I
Oh,
was able to have his body do exactly what it was, since he was already talking about the accident, that's where the activation was, and that's where we can work.
wow.
And so sometimes it's working. If you could have, if anything were possible, how would you have protected yourself, or what would you have wanted to do? So even when they come up with these stories that have, a spaceship comes and takes me, it doesn't matter. The body still responds, because the body is able to fight back or run away.
I mean, using your imagination.
Using your imagination,
Mhm.
that's where imagination, the primitive part of the brain doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. So that's why imagination is so powerful, because when you imagine something, the brain and body truly feels that you're there. So you can go from feeling as scared as anything, and then imagine a safe place in your mind, and you'll notice your body completely start to relax.
And what are some of the actual physical feelings of when you do release it? Like, as I recall, it was like you could feel cold water almost coming out of your veins. You can.
Sometimes, right. Sometimes it's a sense of cold, and that's like letting go of the freeze response many times, coming down your legs or your arms. Sometimes the legs start moving, and it's because they want to run, and so you mimic the running, and that allows that
Wow.
flight to come through. Dancing is one of your listeners just said, because that moves the body. Part of what's going on with COVID is because we're alone and there's not much to do. People are watching TV a lot, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that, but the body's not moving. And so the body can start to feel more fear. So moving is huge. Dancing, that can regulate the
Can
nervous system and help.
yawning.
Yawning, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm working with someone, all of a sudden their stomach gurgles, that tells me
Right.
that, you know,
Energy is moving.
that energy is moving. Because what happens is that when you're afraid, you know, the blood goes and stays more in the, in the big muscles to prepare for fighting or running. And so you start to get digestive issues because you're not digesting, because who cares about digesting the sandwich that I just ate if I have to run for my life? So when people start to calm, then digestion starts and you hear the gurgling,
Mm.
yeah,
Wow.
or belching or
Yeah,
yawning.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Hildy Martinez says, how about intergenerational trauma?
Yeah.
And that's really, we have always have Carrie Gonia that we go to with that, which is family constellation therapy, because they
Yeah.
believe that you carry 13 generations behind and
Mhm.
13 going forward. And she's an incredible family constellation therapist. And they
Yeah.
do work with the intergenerational because it does go to the next generation and the next
Oh,
generation.
so much research is showing up that that shows that there's, intergenerational trauma is very, very real. And so maybe Renee, if you can put up Carrie's information, because that's life changing. I had
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago now, I had two clients completely separate, not related to each other. One in the morning, out of the blue, go, "Hey, do you know anything about family constellation therapy?" And I went, "No, tell me about it." So she told me about it. She works with someone in Canada. The afternoon, same question I get asked. And I'm like, okay, I have to pay attention. And she worked with Carrie, who used to be local here.
Mm.
And you can do it virtually. So you don't have to be in person. And so then I thought, okay, universe is telling me I have to pay attention. So I went and did an appointment with her, and it was life changing. And I've
Yeah,
sent
me too.
almost everybody. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
sent her to
she's
you. Yeah.
amazing. She's truly amazing. Julie Munsterman says, can you discuss suppressed memories and dreams?
Yeah. Well, suppressed just means that you're not fully conscious of them, but they're still there. Just like old trauma. You may not be aware of it because it's repressed or suppressed, but it's still there. And so part of it again is having someone to help guide you through it. They'll know what question to ask. They'll know by your body language what to do. How, when I'm working with someone, their body is guiding me.
Right.
So we can go to places that are completely unplanned. Not that I plan, sessions, but their body is guiding me. And so it's important to, you know, with memory, sometimes a color. If you were hit in a blue room when your mom was making coffee, you may not remember that, but the smell of coffee causes you to feel
Right.
anxious. Or you walk into a room and it's blue, and all of a sudden you notice your heart's beating a little fast, and you may not know why. And so in
So true.
session, we would, if you came in and told me that, we would say, okay, imagine that you're in a blue room, and let's start to notice what happens. And then we just observe the heart beating fast. And so often, if not almost every time, they're just observing whatever sensation showed up, and up pops a memory from the childhood. And I get so many times going, I haven't remembered that in years.
Right, right. That's so true. Lorena Longo, this is really interesting. She says, Kelly, well, I have a client under inducement, QHHT. So that is when they under hypnosis, the higher self, the trauma was a lesson that they picked for this life. That's really very, very accurate to help evolve that soul alone in their spiritual level. And once they understand, as it's said from their mouth, then working on forgiveness and forgive from love part, there's no anger. Then that soul passes the lesson they actually picked before this incarnation. Absolutely, Lorena, absolutely. And we're actually going to talk about that, James and I, during our event on February 12th, because that's very accurate. And often
Wow.
a soul will choose the same type of traumas until they get to a place in a lifetime where they can actually begin to heal it. And
Yeah.
that's what Shirley's talking about, and that's
Yeah.
this soul trauma vortex, actually.
Right, right. And it's important, though, to do the work, because part of, the forgiveness happens after you gotten in touch with the anger. The anger is an important piece to work through
Right.
before forgiveness can happen, because otherwise you're neglecting yourself again. If you want to jump to the forgiveness too quick, you're not you're not spending time on how it felt to you, and what came up when you were little and this stuff was happening. That's an important piece to validate how you felt in
Right.
order to forgive. You know,
Right.
um, but that's why with what we're living with now with COVID, imagine. we all have some kind of trauma. And if we haven't worked through it, this now is added because, as we said, trauma is about unpredictability. So now we have this silent thing, this invisible thing out there that can get us at any time, that can potentially kill us.
Right.
So the trauma is, we're all living in this, in this fight or flight. And you find exhaustion. You find people who are getting depressed. You find people who are a lot more anxious.
Yeah.
So it's a really important piece that's just added to everything that we're talking about.
I mean, we could go on and on. There's so many questions. There's so many things. And what I do want to say is on February 12th, with James and with Shirley and with Geraldine Glass doing the sound healing, we're going to have an hour of questions and answers individual. So you can certainly if you join us that day, you can ask us all kinds of questions, and we're going to go into a lot of more discussions about tips that Shirley's going to give out of how to deal with anxiety and how to deal with depression, and how to help you with trauma and how to release a lot of traumas.
Yeah, and the acceptance piece too.
Yeah.
We're all in this together, so that's why it's so important to connect with people. It's physical distance, not social distance.
Absolutely. So this is really designed, this February 12th event is really designed to help you with giving you a lot of tools and support during, what we've all had is kind of a rough time.
Yeah.
Right?
And you know why, Kel, that the sound bowls are so important? Because I'll tell you, because the auditory processing part of the brain is right next to the amygdala, which is the threat detector of the brain. That's why yelling is so scary for kids, even if you're not yelling at them. If it's a chaotic marriage, as an example. So sound, that's why music can shift your mood in a second. So that's something that I would suggest. Put music that feels melodic, that calms your nervous system. But the bowls, sounds, that's why it can be so healing. I mean, I went to one and I just felt my whole body vibrate.
Oh, when you hear Geraldine, she's phenomenal. And I should say this, everybody. Geraldine's going to be on the show next week with James and me at 8 o'clock. And if you would like the rest of the astrology report, you can join me on Thursdays. This Thursday with Ask Me Anything, and it's at 5 o'clock Pacific time. And I'll be taking your questions about anything psychological or anything spiritual or anything that has to do with mediumship or psychic ability. But I'll also be doing the astrology for February. And you can find me on my YouTube channel, which is Kellee White Spiritual Medium, or you can find me on Facebook Live. So that is this Thursday. And then please join us for February 12th event if you are around, and you can find that on my site or on James's site. And everybody is loving this, Shirley. I love this. I'm so exhausted of forgiving trauma.
I know.
Oh, I hear you, sister.
Exhausting job.
It's exhausting. Frankly, being a soul here is exhausting, right?
Yes, it is. So it's important.
I know.
But I'm glad I'm with you.
Me too.
Me
too. Oh my God. And James. Oh my God.
Of course. Oh yeah, James. And oh my God, I remember I used to tag along with you.
She always did.
Learning with James. Along. I was a total tag along. I was fascinated.
But I loved it.
Oh my God. I just told you I don't want to see them. Don't want to see the spirits, but I find it fascinating.
It is fascinating.
It is. So it's so important to find things that move your soul.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we need to balance it out.
Right. You bet. All right, everybody. Oh, and if you sign up for the COVID effect on February 12th, I just want to put this in. Everybody will receive a free book of Shirley's. It's called Why Can't I Change? And it's a digital copy, but you'll get that right away. It's really interesting because it really does talk about the personality.
Yeah, the first chapter talks about attachment, how we attached, and then how the brain developed depending on our attachment, and how we kind of develop our thoughts and behaviors, and then some tools.
You got it.
Everything I learned.
Take care, everybody. Good night. Thanks,
Good night.
Shirley. Yay.
Oh, you're so welcome. Love you. Good night.
Love you too.
You've been listening to Both Sides Now and Beyond, featuring spiritual medium and master teacher James Van Praagh and spiritual medium and psychotherapist Kellee White.
That was great. Maybe we changed some lives.
And maybe opened up some minds.
Which way do I turn?
Right. I mean left.